everyone. This is Professor Ayman El Tarabishy. I am Deputy Chair of the Department of Management at the George Washington University, and I'm also the ICSB President and CEO, and this is the ICSB Exchange webinar series, but also part of the my courses here that I teach at GW, and I invite usually different experts from around the world to join us here. I am delighted to start the session today, and it's our inaugural Women Entrepreneurship Series in Leadership. And I am delighted to introduce Mrs. Alena Hammond, BSN Senior Vice President, Head of Clinical Development Operations at Covance. Ms. Hammond currently holds the position of Senior Vice President, Head of Global Clinical Development Operations, and is responsible for the operational delivery for full-service outsourced clinical trials. Phase IB through IV, or phase 14, this portfolio is comprised of greater than 500 active clinical trials across the top 40 pharma and emerging biotechs in a broad variety of therapeutic areas. In this role, she leads a global team of over 1,000 people. Alena, we are just delighted to have you here. You must be very busy with all these clinical trials going on as the world is at a standstill here. So it's we really do appreciate your time joining us here. Why don't we go ahead and ask you introduce yourself a little bit and tell us who you are and what you do, and we can go from there.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me today, and I hope that I can provide some of my own learnings to this environment, to these students who are embarking on their own careers, and that, you know, parts of my words of wisdom might ring true and help some of you along your way today. So I've been in the, as I said, I've been in well, I first started off as a registered nurse, working in a hospital, and then got tempted and lured into doing clinical research for a contract research organization. So what we do is pharmaceutical companies hire us to help conduct their clinical trials. And I've been leading, well, I was in operations for a number of years, working directly with the investigative sites, and then with actually leading projects and doing some customer management, and then on into actually operational leadership. So I've been in operational leadership probably about the last 6 years, maybe 7, and really found my calling, which is what I really love to do. And being a visionary leader is the journey that I've been on, and I have been pleased to be able to be a leader in this industry, as well as being able to continue to work with teams and work well together. But that's my goal in life is always to be this focus on being a visionary leader.
This is,
so the board.
Go ahead, continue. No, please continue. Go ahead.
Okay. This was my bio. You just read this. Just a little bit more about me personally is that I am alumni of the University of Alabama. And as I said, I have a capstone college, a degree of capstone college of nursing. I have been in many different women in leadership chapters for several years. And then I was also selected for our LabCorp WIN Leadership Program in 2018. In addition to WIN, I was also a part of the National Charity League when my daughters were younger. And I do have 3 daughters, and quite the joy of my life. And of course, we have some beagles, and I love reading, and I'm still quite a big fan of the University of Alabama because I was raised in Alabama, so you can't help but be. But I do work for LabCorp. A division of LabCorp is Covance, and I'm actually employed within Covance. So I was going to spend just a minute kind of telling you what my company does. And so what we do is we help with diagnostics. That's the LabCorp part of the organization. Many of you may have heard of LabCorp. They're very prominent in the news in regards to the COVID testing. They do assay development as well as just routine lab testing. We have our patient service centers. They're located all over North America, where patients can actually go and get different types of lab care drawn. They partner frequently with hospitals to provide their testing as well. And then with the COVID-19 pandemic, they've been very much involved in developing point of care testing. And it's used quite a bit actually in clinical trials at the moment because, you know, as we're doing clinical trials, it's important that we alleviate noise. And one thing you would like to know is whether or not your patients have been exposed to COVID-19. On the Covance side of the business, we are really about drug development. We have 3 different business units that range from early development, so preclinical, into our actual clinical division, which is where we start with phase 1 studies all the way through phase 4. And then lastly, we also have our central lab division as well, which conducts the testing for clinical trials in a standardized, very consistent way across the globe so that we can make sure that there's no variables that would potentially bring some artifact into the research that's being done and the results that are produced. So we have other enhanced services, but that's the core of our delivery. And as you'll see, when it comes to clinical trials, we go from discovery all the way through commercialization in regards to the work that we do, the services that we provide. So what I was asked to be here today and talk to you about was women in leadership. And as I said at the very beginning, being a visionary leader is near and dear to my heart. So I asked myself, when I first started talking about visionary leadership, I said, well, what is visionary leadership? And I kind of did some Googling and research to say how others describe visionary leadership. And these are some of the terms that came out. So being confident, being intuitive, a risk taker, an expert communicator, being inspiring, optimistic, collaborative, and empathetic. And then a chief organizer, somebody who can be a strategic planner, leads by action, and challenges the status quo. So those are kind of your standard definitions, but what does it mean in real day-to-day environment? And that's what I really want to focus a little bit on with you today, is to say why I think it's important to have an inspiring leader. What is the impact that they can have on people, on employees, on communities, and then I'll tell you a little bit about my personal journey. So I'll first start with the importance of having an inspiring leader. I'm going to step you back into my journey of leadership and tell you about a role model that I had for a number of years, someone who I felt like was just the epitome of an inspiring leader, and how she impacted me personally. So in my journey as being a part of a clinical research organization, I originally started in one of the organizations that I worked at for 17 years in an office out of Atlanta, Georgia. And this particular leader who had various roles of leadership in the organization over the 17 years that I was there, at the time was located at our headquarters in North Carolina, but she was the Southeast region head, and she would visit the Atlanta office from time to time to give us quarterly updates. How is the organization doing a town hall to kind of give us more information about the strategy of the organization. And one of the things that always was just amazing to me was her ability to remember names. Here's this individual, she's got thousands of people reporting into her, and she would show up in a room 2 or 3 times a year in my office, and she always remembered my name. That was just such an amazing connection that she was able to make. And it wasn't just me, it was many others as well. And when she responded to the questions that she got in the town halls, she would call us by name and say, it's good to see you. There was just such a connectivity that she had. And I did ask her years later when I felt more comfortable, because back then I was a global project manager, but I kind of felt like I was one of many, right? But I did ask her many years later, like, how did you remember our names like that? How were you able to do that? And she said, well, I always made it a point to know who my talent is. And I just felt like that was such a great thing for her to say. It was such a personal connection point to me. Another example of how she inspired me was, let's fast forward a few years. I'm actually now been moved to the North Carolina office of the company that I worked for. And I have a lot more opportunity because I live there and I'm working in the office to have direct interactions with her and see her in action, both with customers and internal meetings. And I was always amazed. She had 20,000 employees. She was the only female on our executive floor. And she had such a great interest in growing women in leadership positions. She started and inspired the start of our own WIN chapter within the organization, and then really went about encouraging other women to join the organization and take a part in growing other women leaders. I will say a few things about her. She was tough. She could sometimes be kind of intimidating, but at the same time, she could also be quite personal in a one-on-one setting. She knew what it took to run the business, and she wasn't afraid to tell us what we needed to do to get there. But at the same time, she inspired us with a very forward, future-focused message. I heard her say over and over again, you know, what gets us here today won't get us there tomorrow. We were very top-notch, and our organization was as far as where we were in the market share, but she was never satisfied. She was always wanting us to challenge, do things better, do things differently. She was also always very clear and consistent with her messaging. That message of needing to be continually improvement focused was something that she was always quite clear about. And she was also very supportive of our team. Sometimes we would get into challenging situations with our customers. Maybe something didn't go quite right. She was always there to support us, but then hold us accountable as well. I have lots of stories in my interactions with her. I'll tell you just one more and then wrap this up. But my other last story with her is one day, one of the individuals that I reported into at the time was offering me a new position that was a bit out of my comfort zone. And she sought me out personally in the office, her one of 20,000 employees, and said, you know, it's okay for you to say no if this is not the position you want. She said, but I think you'll be able to do it. And it gave me the courage to take a risk and take a chance, and I continued to grow in my career. So what did I learn from this inspiring leader? I learned that it was important to have a consistent, focused message. I learned that it was really important to have the clarity to be able to respond and be clear in what your vision is, and have the opportunity to always be able to repeat those messages and have that ability to connect with others and let them be able to hear and understand your perspective as you respond. I learned that it was so incredibly important to be future focused, never be satisfied with where you are, how much you can make an impact if you connect with talent, and then how important it is to both inspire professionally and personally. So that's a story of what an inspiring leader did for me in my journey. So then just a few words here about what sets a visionary leader apart. I love this quote by Vince Lombardi. A leader is a visionary that energizes others. This definition of leadership has two key dimensions: creating the vision of the future and inspiring others to make the vision a reality. And so then what do visionary leaders focus on? And some of this will resonate from my storytelling on the last slide, which is retaining trust and loyalty during transition and unsettling times, maintaining the ability to separate business and personal, keeping sight of an emotional component, and then embracing challenges as opportunities. So now what I'd like to talk about next is my own personal journey, and I'm just going to go ahead and fast forward these key learnings that I had. As I said in the beginning, I started off as a nurse, worked in a cardiovascular setting. For those of you who are familiar with how research is done, many times nurses will become study coordinators, where they actually work for physicians that are conducting the research and help them to actually conduct the clinical trials. And I did that for the university that I worked for a number of years. And then someone encouraged me to go into industry, so into the clinical research organization industry. And that was really scary for me because I was a new mother, and what it meant with the job that I was going to be taking was I would need to travel. And that was, although I thought it would be a great growth opportunity, it was definitely a risk. It was not something that I was used to. But I decided to take a risk on myself and took that clinical research associate position. And then from there, I took on, I did move a couple of companies because either I needed to move or my husband did. But in landed with going into project management, and then from there I did some customer management work still within the CRO industry, and as I said, landed in an operational leadership role over the time. So that was kind of, but each one of those journeys, and many times it wasn't necessarily an upward movement when I moved around in my time within that previous CRO. Sometimes it was about taking lateral moves to get greater exposure. And I purposely did that, but I also just took some risks, especially when I didn't feel as if I was always 100% comfortable. There is some statistics that say that women are less likely to take a risk if they are not 100% confident that they can do a job, whereas men will bank on themselves regardless of whether or not they feel like they're 100% ready or not. And I think that that's very true. But I tried my best to be a risk taker and push myself out of my comfort zone, and realizing that there was a network around me that I could leverage. I don't have to be an expert at everything. I just need to make sure I can ask the right questions and challenge the right things. But my personal journey is, if I look back at when I became a project manager, well, even before as a project manager, I was an individual contributor, really focused on what I needed to deliver that day, my own personal goals and objectives. When I became a project manager, I was really focused on what my team needed to deliver. We had, milestones that had to be met, risks that had to be managed as a project manager. And then when I went into customer management, I was really worried about how my portfolio of work for that customer was performing. But in every single one of those instances, I was aligned with another leader's vision and was just driving the performance with whatever was my accountability to align with that leader vision. But I had the first chance to actually take on a larger leadership position when I was given the opportunity to apply for leading a project management group. So I went from being an individual contributor to leading a group of about 140. That was quite intimidating. There was actually several people in the organization that wasn't sure that I could do it, and others that were quite confident that I could. And so my supporters backed me. They encouraged me to take a risk. They said, "You can do this." And I took on the challenge. And I was excited when I first started. The project management team was not performing very well, so I had to focus a lot on performance, what our goals should be, what our metrics should be, how we should be driving results. And then I also was focused on getting my leadership team right, because there was some behaviors within that team that were not going to enable our success. So doing those two things, and I felt like I was doing really well. Metrics are getting better. I've gotten a better leadership team on board. And then I got the opportunity to enroll in my first leadership development course. And I took a 360, and with that 360 came some very clear feedback that I was being what we called a pace setter, a taskmaster, if you want to believe. I was telling people what to do, and I wasn't leading them. I wasn't leaning on them, utilizing their skills, growing them. I needed to be communicating a vision. I needed to give them a direction. I needed to enhance their position, make them happy to engage on this journey with me, not just sit around bark orders. So that was a real eye-opener for me. And I had to change my direction. I had to have a balance between driving results, but leading people through change and leading them to see why it was important to do something different. So at the end of the few years that I did that position, our project management group went from being the worst performing to the best performing compared to some other project management groups in the organization, which was exciting for me. But more than that, I really developed that leadership team. They, after them understanding what our vision was and us talking about it and seeing how they could be a part of it, they joined the journey with me. And they were excited, and we shared results, and we celebrated together. So it was a fantastic first leadership learning for me in my early days of my journey. When I hit those results of a higher performing project management group, my leader at the time asked me to help the other project management groups do something similar. So he pulled me out into this other role where I really needed to influence across those other leaders and help them understand what they needed to do differently to drive, improved results. And that was, again, a risk for me because now I'm not owning it, right? I'm influencing it, which is a very different skill set. And I needed to learn how to influence. I needed to learn how to listen to hear what was important for those other leaders. I needed to be able to figure out how I connect with them in such a way that they see what I have to add as value versus as meddling. and so that was, again, I did that for a couple of years, learned such a great amount. And I really felt like I was, in my leadership journey, I was going from success to significance. And then my next position, I increased my scope. I was leading more than 1,300 people. And I already had a really strong leadership team in place. They really didn't need me to help them get on the journey. They just needed to be able to understand that there might be different ways of doing things. So I was able to really work with them, challenge the status quo, help them understand that what you did tomorrow isn't necessarily going to influence where you want to go, or what you did yesterday, influence where you want to go tomorrow. So we had to focus on different things, and we worked really well together. We really improved some performance in some areas, did some things differently that have been kind of stagnant for a number of years. And at the end of that position, I felt like we had accomplished quite a bit together and actually stabilized a group that had been pretty unstable when I came in. So and then from there, I took on a leadership position at Covance where I am today. So what did I learn on that personal journey, which I'm still learning? I mean, you never know everything, right? But I learned to over-communicate, understand my audience, and focus on accomplishments and future vision. Be a risk taker. Don't be afraid to take a decision or try something new. Accept and give feedback. Seek it out. Feedback is a gift. You want to make sure that as you get feedback, you continue to think about how I can improve from that feedback. Always be customer focused. Understand who your customer is. If you don't have a customer, many times like a position that I'm in, we don't have a job because customers hire us. And so we always need to be thinking about what's best for them. Focus on talent, build a strong team, and have an impact on people. And then don't look back. Look forward, adapt, drive solutions, and continuous improvement. And just one more slide, and I'll be done, and open it up for the Q&A. Hopefully, I'm about right on time. So what, my takeaway here is, what do you want to be when you drive a leadership culture? What should that leadership culture look like? Culture and accountability in any leadership team or any team that you're a part of is paramount to success. You've got to make sure you understand how you want to work together. It's not about the team. It's not about what you do. It's about how the team performs with one another, how we collaborate with one another, how we utilize our network, and then constantly focus on who's going to be the next person that we want to bring into a leadership or have the next opportunity. So always thinking forward, that next as far as talent. Maintain and drive a continuous improvement mindset. I always do that with any team that I lead or any team that I'm a part of, is I encourage them to always be challenging our perspective, always be thinking outside the box. Just, again, what got us here today won't necessarily get us where we want to go tomorrow. And then you got to be willing to take risks and also accept failure. If you learn by making mistakes. I tell that to my own children all the time, who are all I have one left in college, I have two who are out of college. I always encourage them. I said, where you are today won't necessarily be where you end your career. So always be willing to open a door, see what's on the other side. But sometimes you won't get it right, and that's okay because you'll learn from that. And then that feeds into that continuous improvement mindset. So that's the end of my presentation around my leadership journey. And I'll just say again, being a visionary leader is about seeing what you can do versus a manager, which they do what they can see.
This is absolutely fantastic, Alena. This is just great. And there's a lot to unpack here. There's a lot of ways we can approach this. So there's a lot of information here. So, but let me first say thank you very much for joining us today. And so we start with a big thank you here. But I want to go back. I want to kind of create a timeline here so people understand how it all evolves here. And you said you're from the University of Alabama. My brother lives in Alabama, so that's just fantastic. In Birmingham, Alabama. So that's just another good sign here. Um, but let me take you back when in your college days, right? Undergrad or graduate here, right? Tell us about your early, and I'm putting on the spot here, but tell me your earliest, recollections or thought processes about this concept of management and leadership and being in a team when you started interacting with these concepts here in classes and groups and group presentations. How did that evolve? What was your initial thoughts about all of this?
I look back on my journey and it's really hard to pinpoint a time when things started, changing for me in a different way in regards to viewing my own personal journey of where I wanted to go. Because when I graduated and I started working at the University of Alabama in Birmingham, as a critical care nurse. And at the time, I wanted to potentially go back to school and be a nurse anesthetist. And that was what was on my mind. But then I realized that perhaps not being in the hospital setting long term was what I wanted. Maybe I wanted to do something differently. And I actually took a job at a clinic. And I was bored out of my mind that I had worked at a critical care setting. It was fast-paced. You're running around. You're working in a group of really highly talented people between the nurses and the doctors and the interns and the attendings. And it was a lot of fun to run a clinic where you're just doing one thing at a time. And I realized that was just not for me. And that's when I looked into other opportunities, which was being a study coordinator for a clinical, for attending that ran sponsored clinical trials. And I did take on a leadership position there in my early days. I worked for that position, that attending for 3 years. And my last year with them, I took on a small leadership position. And when I was first exposed to it, which was doing performance management and setting goals and objectives and things that were a bit out of my comfort zone, I actually didn't like it at first and kind of steered away from it. And so when I took on that project management leadership position that I told you about, which was my first time really being a leader of 140, that's what I really had to orient myself around. Is I wasn't there doing the task. I now needed to lead people and help them understand what work they needed to do. And then I had to tell them when they did a good job or not. I had to set goals. I had to set, targets and drive in a different way. But I had to be ready for it. I don't think I was ready for it prior to then.
Good. All right. So here comes the difficult questions here, but here how I see it. Right. At some point in your life and career, and even for me and all that stuff, we get into this whole intersection between getting married, starting a family, having kids, and then career.
That's right.
Right.
That's
and
right.
I read the articles. They're in the Washington Post. They're in the New Yorker. They're in the New York Times. That the recent articles that are coming out is saying that women in executive positions are having a harder time than men because there's kids at home, right? They're looking at the mom to manage the kids' education plus the house plus the work, right? But this is a career path that you started here. I don't want to ask any questions because I don't know what question to ask appropriately here, but what is your reaction to all of this? You've read the articles that I'm reading as well, and kind of what's your reaction to all of this?
I've been asked this question many times because in my current position before the pandemic, I traveled quite a bit and things like that. And at one point in time when my children were younger, my husband also traveled. And, what we decided to do with one another was to support one another in your own career interests. And we felt like as long as one parent was there or the other, and at times I leveraged my mother to come and help me out. And I did my best never to miss a major event. If I did, I connected with my kids to find out how they were going. But with the current environment, I can only imagine. I don't have kids that need to sit down instead of going to school in the day, have to sit down and log into their computers like you were explaining to me that you had to do this morning. And I do think that what I always encourage anyone who asks me these questions is, who's your network? What's your support system at home? You know, can you lean on your spouse, on your significant other, on a parent to help you? And if not, how do you lean in with your employer that says, I want this opportunity. However, I'm going to need to have some flexibility as well because I have children at home and I can't, you know, and it's important to me to maintain that home work-life balance. And then give it your all when you're there, right? How do you make sure you're always focusing on the right things and doing what you need to do to accomplish and show your results when you're in the moment? So that's the way I managed my career over the years.
No, I understand. As for some people that don't know, today was the first day for my kids' school, and the whole system in the county broke down. So I was the IT guy, and I'm dad, and I'm trying to figure this all out here because it gets challenging, and I can just imagine the consequences of all of this. Let me move now a little bit forward. So you started your career, you started your family, you had a system in place. It's all about the system that you put in place here. And now you're at work. Now you're starting your early leadership positions here. And some of it, you kind of know how it works, or you're going with your gut feeling or your instincts here. Some of it is you're learning from your mentors here. What's the secret? What's the secret sauce between all of this? You're starting out, you're trying to figure it out. How did you manage all this together here?
Trial and error would be the first thing I would say, because I certainly didn't get it all right. And I was really open to feedback though. And I mentioned that in one of my points, is that if you walk into it thinking that you got it and you don't need anybody to teach you anything, you're wrong. You know, we all have something to learn. And I struggled at first in that leadership position because I was spending so much time putting the onus on what I needed to do versus leveraging a team. And that was of course I'd leveraged the team as a project manager, but leveraging a leadership team to lead a group was a much different environment. And I didn't know how to do it at first. You know, I really needed to, and I used mentorship, I used classes, I used trial and error, I used feedback. I sought out, you know, I would sit down with my boss and my mentors and said, here's how I handled this situation. How would you have handled it? So I tried really hard for kind of on-point learning about how to do things differently and tried to be very open-minded about different ways to accomplish things. But that's why I said, for me, it was a risk. And I certainly didn't get it right all the time, but I was also very willing to, you know, kick off the dust from where I fell down and start back up and try again. So being persistent.
Yeah, when you were trying to create your brand or your leadership brand or position there, right? And I'm gonna try to contrast here. Did you feel that you had to prove yourself more than another man? Was there always that little thing there saying, well, you know, I don't know, I really don't know, but I feel that, and based on the research I saw, that it was always probably more difficult for a woman to prove it to herself than a man in their capabilities and their leadership position. What's your reaction to that statement?
I'll tell you a little story. So when I was doing that first job, which I told you I needed some significant trial and error, and I was working really hard and felt like I was actually accomplishing very little, my assigned mentor for that leadership development course that I was in was a very successful male. And he actually shared with someone who shared it with me because I was struggling. He shared with me that he didn't think I was going to make it. or he didn't share it with me. He shared it with somebody else who told me. That was just the spur that I needed to prove that he was wrong. So it was really phenomenal. But from then on out, I was like, okay, never let them see you, never let your weakness show, because it was obvious I was struggling and it was showing. So I learned how to put on a little bit more of a confident demeanor. Not letting people see my cracks, making sure that although I didn't know everything, I could certainly be confident and go back, in my own time, my own comfort zone, my own mentors, to ask when questions around uncertainty. So that was an important lesson for me, because I was making myself a little bit too vulnerable as a leader. So again, you got to have a network. You know who your board of directors are, so that you have the people that you can go and talk to, but also, be careful about, at the end of the day, making sure that you still show confidence in yourself. And that's what I needed to do. So yes, I do think it's sometimes harder, because women can be more emotional. Women can wear their feelings a little bit more on their sleeves. And sometimes in a world of direct comparison, someone might think that is a detractor, versus actually I think it's awesome. Because I think if you take a mixed culture, a diverse culture of men, women, backgrounds, you actually get even better thinking. That emotional intelligence that is so important as a leader comes out more, because you can learn from each other and have more of a varied way of thinking, bringing solutions together instead of everybody just looking the same and having all the same solutions. I think that mixture can really make a team even more dynamic.
So again, another question here, but this is based on entrepreneurship research here. It says that women entrepreneurs are better networkers than men entrepreneurs. And the rationale is very simple, right? For them to be successful, they like to ask more questions, connect with more people, get more information to make a decision. But with men entrepreneurs, it's less. They think they know more than what they think they know. Okay, so knowing this, there is a value added. There's an advantage, because it seems from the research that women network more than men, right? Which is we all agree to this. But there's a challenge with networking. There's a challenge with networking too much, which is the challenge of trust. Who do you trust?
That's right.
And building this trust. Building this trust takes time, and you never know what can happen with this, right? What's your reaction to that issue here?
Oh, I completely agree. I mean, I think that story that I just told lends to, the fact that that I had a trust concern. But I think when you go into networking, I think you have to be purposeful about it. What do you want to gain from that time together? Is it more information? Is it feedback? Is it just understanding what's going on? Is it driving connections? And build that over time. Don't go into a conversation thinking that that you can immediately are going to have the same goals. Because every person is a person with their own personal goals. So you need to get to know someone and understand what's important to them. How does it align with what's important to you? And then build from there. But I would also encourage women not to let networking, because I'm a networker, I love to network, but you shouldn't let it influence your ability to make your own decisions. Be clear about what you want, and if you take a decision, what might be the impact for what you actually wanted to do. However, also in that collaboration, understanding what's important to others, and then if you take a decision that impacts them, then that may not have a great outcome at the end of the day on a team or within an organization.
So let's get into some delicate situations here. Talk to me a little bit about having difficult conversations with team members or reports to you, because it's a delicate balance between upfront to the point, and also showing empathy, but also getting things done, right? And the perceptions of this are totally different from, I believe, from a man doing it versus a woman doing it, right? Or maybe I'm wrong. What's your reaction to this?
I've had it both ways. I've had some women leaders who are probably tougher on me than some men leaders, and so I think it's a lot of times that can be personality driven. Unfortunately, some women who are tough are sometimes seen as, oh, they get labeled with different words about why they're, tough and maybe more difficult to work with, just being assertive. But my philosophy to feedback, especially difficult conversations, is I always try to frame with something positive. There's always got to be a positive for someone. And, in the extreme cases, perhaps there's not, and you just have to approach it head on. But for the most part, I like to take the idea of tell a positive, and then if you want to get into where the feedback's coming from, frame it with, what's really important, or what we need to do, or what I expect of you and why I expect it of it is, whatever the topic is. And then try to frame it around why I don't think what they're doing or how they're behaving fits that expectation or that goal. But I try to frame the why versus just going straight into the what, and also very conscious about how to talk about the how, because you can get something accomplished and do it in a wrong way with wrong behaviors, and that individual might think they've had a good outcome. And I deal with this actually quite a bit because I work in a service industry. So it's all about how we interact with one another. But if we don't leverage the how, then, the what, you may get there, but it may not have really the outcome that you wanted. And then at the end, after I've kind of gotten through the why and what I really want them to focus on, I try to help them, give them some suggestions. Hey, let's talk through this, or offer a follow-up to say, why don't you go and give this some thought, come back, and let's talk through it some more next time. And maybe give them some pointers about some ways that maybe through mentorship or training or how else they can develop to meet that expectation. And then I usually try to also then end it back with again, that offer of support and reinforcement of what I think they're doing well. So it tries to make it not feel as if just a punitive discussion, but really a constructive discussion.
Good. So I'm gonna ask 3 quick questions, and then we'll open up for all questions here. So as I mentioned to you, I'm also the deputy chair in the Department of Management, and I teach classes, right? So I'm teaching 3 classes this semester. I am very busy, right? And one of the one of the most new classes I'm teaching here called Business Essentials, right? That's the title, Business Essentials for Dynamic Markets, right? And it's a 7-week course. It's very intensive. I have a lot of students in it, and I am throwing everything at them, including the kitchen sink. I'm getting them to do many things, readings, webinars. Some of them are in this webinar here, right? And I am pushing them to absorb like sponges, everything here. But I specifically asked this question to you about the women leaders in my class. This is their first class they're taking at GW. So this is their first graduate MBA class called Business Essentials, right? What advice would you give them in the Business Essentials course as they move from my class to the other classes and onward? What's your reaction saying, you need to know this or remember this?
Oh gosh, in a Business Essentials course. So I would say a few things that kind of come to mind is to be a good team member. Really kind of focusing on what each person is trying to learn and how can you learn together. Be thinking about, what drives a business. So what are the end goals to that business? So to be a good team member means you're also a good team member within an organization. So if you're emulating an organization, the thought processes behind how to set a strategy in business, how to communicate goals, how to set targets, how to also make sure that you have a way to report on progress. That's always going to be so important from, in essential business management. And then I think it's about spending your time wisely. It sounds like you're throwing everything at them. So how do they prioritize? Because there's always got to be something to prioritize. If I had to accomplish everything on my to-do list every day, I'd never sleep. So I always have to think about what is most important that I get done today. And then how do I leverage my team members if you're working in groups or, group studying, et cetera, to say, your strengths are here and my strengths are there. So how do we come together and support one another?
Good. So you talk about
off the top of my head.
No, this is perfect. This is what I wanted. So you talk about maximizing the knowledge acquisition and then working in teams to get it, right? Which is
That's
good.
right.
So now I'm going to switch to my next class, okay? My next class is all about creativity and innovation. Okay, so these students self-selected themselves. They saw the course saying creativity and innovation, so they joined up. What's your reaction or ideas about the concept of creativity and innovation?
Number one, I think I should sign up for it because I always don't think I'm the most creative person in the world. So maybe you could teach me a few things. But to me, about being creative and innovative is about forward thinking. I talked about that some in my discussion. I'm amazed by people that can have a problem. They see a problem, and there's the traditional solutions maybe that you could leverage through your research or other things. But then that ability to challenge the status quo and come up with a different solution. Just think about, the evolution that we're in from Blackberries to iPhones to all these other Androids and things like that. I mean, it was all about somebody who looked at something and said, there's a better way to do it. So how do you drive that innovation through that mindset that what you got in front of you is never good enough? How do you, that growth mindset of where you want to take it? I love people that can do that and challenge that status quo and tell me I'm being an old, dog. I'm being an old dog with no new tricks. So I love for people to come and tell me better ways to do things.
I have two phones. I carry two phones. I carry a BlackBerry Q10 or Q11 still, and I carry, a new phone. But the BlackBerry is used only for phone. But I remember it because it's a symbol of what they could have done if they moved forward with creativity and innovation.
Exactly.
So
exactly.
My last question is for my entrepreneurship class. So I am teaching an entrepreneurship class for a few people are thinking of being entrepreneurial or starting a business or joining an entrepreneurial team. What would you say to them?
Entrepreneurship to me is about really being a visionary, someone who is, always thinking about what isn't there versus what is there, how to branch out and create something that no one else has thought of, or taking a big risk, right? If you're a startup company and you've got this great idea, then you're very entrepreneurial if you're willing to take a risk on yourself. But then, of course, you have to be able to influence others to want to take that risk with you, not likely going to do it on your own. So to me, to be an entrepreneurial, you need to be dynamic, forward thinking, but you also got to be about bringing people along with you on that journey and influencing investors or influencing employees to take a risk or go out and try to find the best talent that can help you with that, whatever you're envisioning that you want to go. So that's, to me, when I think about entrepreneurship, that's what I think about being important.
Good. We have some really good questions here coming in. So let me ask, this is from actually a student of mine, from Zach. He goes, thank you for this. And one point that I related to was in one of your first roles, you doubted your ability to take on a new role beyond an individual contribution, but a mentor said something like, you don't have to do this, but I think you can. I see this self-doubt with my wife, and I would like to encourage her to take the risks. Any advice for her to take risks, but also me to support her? First of all, he's very nice and he's fantastic to say this, but what do you think?
I think you have to tell her, you have to give somebody permission to fail. And that's what, I think when I was taking that risk, I had to believe in myself, and I bolstered that belief by going to my network, the trusted network, those ones that I really knew were a part of wanted my success. And I talked through it with them. I did my pros and cons. I said, okay, what happens if, and where do I fall back if this doesn't work? And then I had to give myself the ability to say, well, you know what? You're not going to ever know if you don't try. And so that's when I convinced myself to just just try. And I was not 100% positive that I was going to be successful, but I also leaned back on my proven track record because I'd always performed well in my jobs. And I said, well, it's just about taking on a new aspect of the job that I'm just not comfortable with. So I know how to do all these things. I'm a technical expert. I know how to run projects. I know how clinical trials get done. So I can lean on that. I can talk to customers about performance. It's really about what don't I know. And then I allowed myself to prioritize on the aspects of where I needed to learn so that to drive my confidence. And it got more and more confident over time. But every single time I've been asked to take on a new role, I had to kind of go through that same process again. Okay, what if that? And I'll allow myself the time to say, well, then the first year I'm going to make some mistakes, and that's okay because I'm going to learn from it. I hope that's helpful.
No, extremely helpful at all. I tell people, what's the worst that can happen? They say no.
That's right.
So
That's right.
I'm like, and I tell them that no for me stands for the next opportunity. That's what no stands for. And so there's a question from Sarah, and that's a really good question because it ties to, I'm giving my Business Essentials class a simulation, right, for them to implement the change process, right? And so her question kind of relates to the simulation. She says, how have you been successful in not only sharing your vision, but getting others to buy into the vision? So it's a two-part question, sharing your vision and then getting people to buy into it and execute it. How would you answer this?
So what's worked for me in the past is, number one, the vision needs to be aligned to where the organization wants to go or where the industry wants to go. And then the next step for me was aligning my leadership team. So, you're not going to create a vision in a silo. You've got to have people who are on the journey with you. So it's, can you get your leadership team, whoever you've selected to be on your leadership team or whoever you inherited for a leadership team if you walked into it, to also align in that vision. So, and there's a difference between agreement and alignment. So agreement might mean that they hear you, right? And they can conceptually agree, but alignment is how are you going to do it together? That's when you actually join hands and you're like, okay, this is the vision that we're going to drive together. And then what I have often found when you need to drive something down into an organization, especially when you need to drive big change, is you go find your early adopters. So who are those others that you can bring in that can be on that journey with you, that can be your spokespersons with you? And then it's about repeating why is it important, what's in it for them? Always that message about why this vision is going to help us, both as an organization, personally, and you got to know your audience, and you got to figure out what your message needs to be that still carries on the vision, but it adapts to the individuals that you're speaking with. So those are the ways that I've tried to, drive my vision of what I needed was through leadership, early adoption, repeating, understanding your audience.
Yep. So there's another really good question here, but I want to tie it to the future ahead, to moving forward here. I keep telling a lot of people, especially my students, my class, I say it's the end of the status quo. Everything is changing now. We're moving into a new world, a new future. Things are going to be different. So I say this, but let me tie it in the question that came in. She goes, permission to fail is 100%. She agrees with you. But here's the but question comes here. I think women feel the pressure of failure so much more because vulnerability is often seen as a weakness.
Yeah.
What do you think? Do you think there's an opportunity here to gap this with this new end of the status quo?
There has to be, because I don't think having empathy and vulnerability prevents you from driving good business performance. It just gives you a chance to connect perhaps in a different way with your audience. So in a remote world that we're moving into, I used to be office-based for years, but now I'm remote. So I'm having to connect with people in a new and different way. And if I don't show empathy to what they're doing on the ground right now, the trials that they're experiencing, I don't think I would bring people on the journey with me. I think if we don't demonstrate that we understand that the flexibility and the way that we're working now is so much different than it was, where you can't just drop your children off at daycare or perhaps your parents' house. It's different. They're not going to school. So I have actually found that empathy to actually aid me as a leader, versus in the past, perhaps, as you said, when you're office-based and it's all about performance, maybe you are seen in a little bit of a different light. But I think this is our chance to capitalize on that, just as you suggested, to say this is what women leadership bring in a time of change.
Absolutely. And we're almost out of time here. So what I want to do is maybe give you kind of the last words of advice for everyone that is on this webinar, that also will watch it, and also specifically for women leaders, okay, or you call them WIN. What would you say?
Well, I would say, as I said, risk-taking is a good thing. Believing in yourself and having confidence, but building that network around you. But when you actually get into the workplace, you know, that stat that gets quoted about women won't plan for their next until they're 100% confident they can be there. If you're walking in saying, not what I always want to do next, what is my next, so that you can continually plan for the future. And sometimes those are lateral moves, not hierarchical moves, because if you would get a lateral move, you can be more of a utility player, and you can, you know, have a different types of personal goals. So that would be something that I would really encourage you to do as you embark on your career, is to really think about what that, not only just that next, but next, and don't be afraid to branch out and go sideways, because that might actually help you go more lateral, more higher later on.
This is incredible. This was actually an absolutely fantastic webinar here. So a big round of applause for you, for your time and for your effort and for your knowledge and empathy, which is really important here. And I want to thank you so much for joining us here. I know I called you out of the blue, or I asked Linda to connect us here and ask you here, but this is just important, especially in today's world. You know, you're driving 100 miles an hour, but yet we need to have some time to reflect and to learn from each other. And that's the trick, is this whole time to reflect and learn from each other. So I really appreciate, I think everybody on this session also is very appreciative and thankful for your time here. And with that, we'll end the session. Alena, thank you so much. Linda, thank you for connecting us here.
Dr.
Have a wonderful day. Please stay safe, everybody.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye,
Thank you
everybody.
so much. Bye-bye.